a lantern glowing beneath the waves. What secret could it hide? Welcome to Fabled Codex. I am your host, Mithrin. Comment below where you're listening from. I can't wait to see your replies. Now the story begins. The first intimation of the matter came to us on a raw November evening, when the lamps along Baker Street blurred in the mist and the wheels of the passing cabs hissed like serpents on the wet macadam. Holmes had been singularly silent all day, refusing my suggestion of a firelit game of chess, and instead occupying the settee with his long limbs thrown indolently across it, his pipe upon his breast, and his eyes fixed upon the cracked rosette in the ceiling which, as he once told me, had the profile of a Roman senator, if viewed at precisely the right angle. It was near 8 o'clock when Mrs. Hudson's step preceded a peremptory knock, and a moment later ushered in an elderly gentleman who carried upon him the look of one whose life has been long accustomed to exactitude and the sea. He was of spare build, his beard salt-white and trimmed to a nautical neatness, his cheeks wind-chafed, and his right eye faintly opacified, as if some old squall had left its ghost upon him. In his gloved hands he clutched a tin case, dented and roped about with twine. His clothing, though of good quality, bore the damp sheen and fine crust of salt which told of recent travel. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he said with a respectful inclination, and then his gaze sharpened. A mariner sighting an unexpected buoy. "You are as they spoke of you in Portsmouth, thin as a marlinspike and, if the newspapers are to be credited, twice as pointed." Holmes's eyes brightened. "And you, sir, have been in a boat recently, not a large one, for your coat smells of bilge rather than of tar. You have come a distance by rail, for your cuffs are gritted with the coal dust peculiar to the Southampton line. And the left boot you favour has a cut near the welt that was not there this morning, since the leather still stands up." He gave a small bow from the settee. "Please warm yourself by the fire. You have something to tell us which would prefer the privacy of a closed door." Our visitor managed a weary smile. "I, Captain Elias Vane, late of the merchant steamer Prospero." He lowered himself to the chair I brought forward and placed the tin case upon his knees, as a woman might a child. "What I bear here, gentlemen, I scarcely understand. But I know trouble when I smell it, even if it smells like salt water and lamp oil." Holmes turned his head slightly. I saw his nostrils flare. "Ah," he murmured. "Whale oil, not coal. No, there, a trace of spermaceti, and beneath it something metallic. Brass, copper. No, see, wet iron." Captain Vane gave a short, surprised laugh. "Lord above. Perhaps I ought to let the case do the talking." He set it upon our table, freed the twine with a knife, and pried open the lid. From within he drew a curious object swaddled in oilskin, a lantern of antique make, of brass panels and thick greenish glass, with a hinged hood like a monk's cowl. But the glass was occluded, opal murky, as if the sea had breathed within it. A wick hung there, dark as if long quenched. The metal, though rubbed, bore delicate arabesques of verdigris that climbed it like seaweed. Holmes leaned forward, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw him shiver. "How old?" he asked softly. "Could be 100 years, could be 3, said Vane. "We brought it up in a diver's dredge 5 days past. Not by chance. We were contracted to a private expedition. A Mr. Oswald Pennington, a man of means and nervous disposition, who swore he had a map to a wreck somewhere off the Needles. He was right enough. We found timbers, ironwork, and this lantern wedged in a truss of rotted rope. Pennington handled it as if it were a reliquary. Then that same night he vanished from his cabin." "Vanished?" I exclaimed. "In port?" "In open water," Vane returned. "We had weighed anchor to circle the site at dawn. At 2 bells of the middle watch, the steward brought Pennington tea and found the cabin empty. From that hour to the next there was no boat lowered, no ladder down, no lantern lit, save the one in my hand." He nodded at the object. "And that, Mr. Holmes, is the singular part. We had stowed this lantern in a locker within my quarters, wrapped, as you see, cold and lifeless. Yet at 4 bells, when I returned from the deck, there was a glow coming through the oilskin like something breathing beneath a shroud. It was lit, sir, though none had touched it, and it burned with a pale sea-green fire. A small sound escaped me." Holmes's fingers steepled. The foghorn of a distant steamer moaned, as if in sympathy with the old mariner's tale. "What did you do?" asked Holmes. "What any sailor does with a thing he doesn't ken," said Vane. "I doused it. But here is another knot. The flame would not die to water, nor to the cap laid firm. It guttered only when I turned the wick to its lowest inch and spoke. This is childish. I know the words Pennington had muttered when he first laid hands on it. Let what shone beneath the sea shine now. I had mocked him for it. I used the same words to quench it out of sheer superstition, and the light went black as if I had snuffed a thought. Holmes's eyelids lowered. Spoken words that act as levers upon men's imaginations, and sometimes upon their misdeeds, he murmured. Pray continue. There's little else save trouble. At dawn we made a second sounding. We found no more of value, and I resolved to run into Portsmouth and put this matter before some authority before the crew mutinied from fear. 3 men swore they saw Pennington's shadow upon the waves that night. Another said he heard tapping from the sea, as of knuckles upon glass. I know what waves can do to a man's wits, Mr. Holmes, but I also know when a thing is wrong. I locked the lantern and set watch. Yesterday, upon mooring, I made for the hotel where Pennington had lodged before we sailed. He had left a trunk in their care. Vane's hand trembled as he reached into the tin case again and produced a folded paper, stiff with salt. This I found inside, a fragment of a chart and a note addressed to E.V., that is me. Holmes took the paper with reverent care. I leaned in, breathing the faint odor of sea and mildew. The chart, if such it was, showed a crude outline of the Isle of Wight, and a series of dotted marks running out to the west, like stitches into the channel. At one point, a small sketch of a lantern had been added in a hand too delicate for any seaman I had known. The note in that same hand read, "If I am not returned, you must take it to the one who sees through fog. The light is a key and a tongue. Beware those who would silence it." There was no other address, said Vane, but every man in Portsmouth knows who sees through fog. They pointed me to Baker Street, and here I am. I do not ask you about ghosts. I ask you about a man, Oswald Pennington. Where has he gone, and what is this contraption to do with it? If there is danger to my crew or to myself, I would rather face it with full knowledge than with sailors' tales in my ears. Holmes rose at last. The indolence of his limbs fell from him, as leaves from a branch. He set the lantern upon the table and circled it twice, his long fingers hovering, not touching, like a violinist testing the hush before a note. "Watson," said he, "your glass, if you please." I brought my magnifier, and he peered through at the greenish panes. Yes. Sea scorian etching upon the glass, no, not etching, a deposit, salt and a trace of copper compounds, perhaps from long companionship with a ship's bell or brace. Here the hinge is new, recently repaired and not by a craftsman. See this bird screw? A nervous hand. And the wick, he added, drawing in its odor, is not of recent make. It has the faint sweetness of old flax, prepared with beeswax rather than modern paraffin. He stepped back. "Captain Vane, you have done a wise thing. If your Pennington vanished from a shut cabin at sea, he went either through the door, the porthole, or in the imagination of your men. I do not hold with the last unless driven to it by the first two. Did he have enemies aboard? No more than the usual resentment a paying passenger earns when he orders sailors as if they were footmen," Vane said dryly. "He was particular, secretive, kept his trunk locked and his papers on his person. A gentleman of sorts, but with the character of a man who lives mostly inside his own skull." Holmes's smile was cold and swift. "A countryman of mine, then." He tapped the chart. "This itinerary of dots betrays a pattern not of guesswork, but of knowledge. He was not searching. He was going to a mark. What sank there that he alone expected to find? And who else knew he would seek it? For I outvote your ghosts with 2 human facts. First, someone has reopened and roughly mended this lantern in recent weeks. Second, your Mr. Pennington anticipated danger enough to leave his puzzle to the one who sees through fog. He expected to be interrupted. The hour chimed and a gust rattled the window. The street lamps swam like jellyfish in the mist. Captain Vane's good eye fixed upon Holmes, with the intensity of a man measuring his last charted reef. "You will take the case?" he asked. Holmes's gaze slid from the lantern to the mariner and then to me. In that instant, there was in his face the animation I had seen only when his mind, like a hound, had caught the true scent and leapt. "I will take the case," he said. "But I do not promise to keep your hands from tar or your boots from salt. We shall require rooms near the docks by morning, Watson, and a visit to the naval hydrographer before noon. For to learn what shines beneath the sea, One must first know who wished it never to shine at all. He touched the lantern lightly with a finger, and though the fire was low, I could have sworn the green glass deepened, as if some far phosphorescence had stirred within it. Morning found us upon the Portsmouth train, the November light a grey sheet against the carriage windows, the hedgerows rushing past like ink strokes upon wet paper. Holmes had insisted upon bringing the lantern in my valise, where he had nested it absurdly between a folded shirt and my shaving kit, as if it were a parish teapot. He had said little since we quitted Baker Street, save to request, with that absent politeness of his, that I keep the case upright and that I refrain from striking a match near it. Once, as the engine laboured up a grade, he drew the oilskin back a finger's breadth to admit the smallest thread of air and then closed it again, listening as one listens to a distant clock. "It has no intention of burning at present," he remarked, catching my look. "That is useful. A phenomenon that refuses to repeat is frequently the child of circumstance rather than miracle. We must learn the exact circumstances that produced your captain's sea-green flame." "You have a hypothesis already," said I. "I have a ladder without its lower rungs. I will not climb." He tilted his head toward the passing telegraph poles. "But I will say this much. Men are apt to write ghost upon any slate they have not the patience to clean. At Portsmouth, we engaged a cab for the quay, its horse's iron shoes clattering on the stones, and the salt of the Solent came into our faces with that curious medicinal power the sea always has upon me. Captain Vane had left word with the Prospero's steward. A boat was waiting to pull us aboard. The steamer rode at her moorings with a squat, workmanlike look, the sort of ship that does not so much cleave the sea as shoulder through it. The crew watched us come up the ladder with expressions that to my eye showed fatigue sharpened into superstition. Sailors do not relish mysteries at close quarters. Vane met us at the rail. A night had knocked little from him. His good eye was clear enough, though there was a nervous drag to his mouth that bespoke disturbed sleep. He led us at once below to his own cabin, where he had kept the lantern locked. Holmes set my valise upon the table and, with a glance to me, unwrapped the oilskin. The greenish panes were dull as bottle glass in fog. "No glow," Vane muttered almost hopefully. "None," said Holmes. "Let us first put an end to romance by examining the room in which this romance occurred." He nodded to the corridor. "Pennington's cabin." It was a narrow place with a bunk, a bolt cupboard, a porthole not much larger than a dinner plate, and a writing shelf with an inkwell screwed into it. The steward, a fair-haired young man with sailor's hands and a clerk's anxious neatness, stood by to answer questions. "He was named Sykes. You brought him tea at 2 bells, Holmes began. "Was the door locked?" "Bolted, sir. Mr. Pennington always bolted it at night." I knocked. No answer. I set the tray down and went away. "And at 4 bells?" "Captain's orders to check." "The door was on the latch, sir, not bolted. Room empty. His valise gone. His coat still to the peg, though, his heavy coat. Strange." Holmes crouched to the deck, drew a handkerchief, and swept it lightly along the join of 2 boards. When he shook it out, I saw the finest glister of crystals. "Salt," I said. "Not of the sea," Holmes returned. "Too coarse for dried spray, too pure for cargo. Evaporated brine, perhaps, boiled down. Many a chemist could arrange a green flame with such and a copper salt. But a ship is not a laboratory, and this deposit is feeble. Mr. Sykes, who cleaned this floor after Mr. Pennington's disappearance?" "No one, sir. Captain said to leave it as it was till someone clever could look." His eyes went to Holmes with a shy faith that would have warmed a colder man than I. Holmes rose and put his head to the porthole. "Hinges sound, bolts honest. Watson, try your shoulders." I tried the opening. "No man of Pennington's build could have forced himself through without leaving skin and cloth upon it." "There were none." "He went by the door," Holmes said softly. "And of that I have no doubt." He turned to the writing shelf where a blot of ink had dried into a small dark continent. With a fingernail he flaked at its edge, then took from his pocket a small lens and peered. "Fibers," he murmured. "Fine waxed flax beeswax again, and a smear of verdigris. Captain, who aboard has recently handled old brass and then dipped his fingers in ink?" Vane's brow furrowed. "We all handle old brass, Mr. Holmes. She's a merchant steamer. Her fittings are not new. Ink only my clerk for the log, and Mr. Pennington himself, who wrote constant. There is Hargreaves, my first mate. He keeps the cargo book with the clerk. There's Teague, the diver, who has a habit of thumbing anything that's not nailed down. Teague." Holmes's eye quickened. A diver with a habit of touching things. Does he keep a journal? Lord, no, he can scarcely sign his name. Holmes nodded as if gratified. Then the fingers at this inkwell were less likely his. We will meet him later. For now, the locker where you put the lantern. Vane took us to his own cabin. The locker was a simple sea chest, scuffed by years. Inside, a faint ring, as if something had sat warm upon the wood and then cooled, was visible to my untrained gaze. Holmes bent close, sniffed, and pressed the pad of his finger to the ring's inner edge. He lifted it to the light. A ghostly smear glowed upon his fingertip. Phosphor, he said very low. Not strong, but present. Sykes, did you notice any odor when you saw the glow? Not oil, another. Sykes frowned. Like a match when you strike it, sir. A sort of sharp, nose-prickling smell, but there was no smoke. Holmes's mouth thinned in satisfaction. Thank you. He replaced the oilskin. Captain Vane, 2 matters more. First, your Mr. Pennington's trunk at the hotel. Second, the Admiralty hydrographer. Watson and I will attend to both. In the interim, I would be obliged if no man aboard lays a finger upon this lantern. Put your most unimaginative sailor at the door with orders to admit none. Vane grunted assent. Hargreaves will curse me, but he can curse the wind as well. He'll get as much answer. We returned ashore and made for the hotel on the high street. The proprietor, a bulbous-nosed fellow who spoke as if beer had varnished his tongue, produced Pennington's trunk with alacrity when he saw Holmes's card. With a delicate instrument of his own contriving, a flat-bladed thing, slender and persuasive, Holmes persuaded the lock to yield without violence. Within we found neatly folded shirts, a second pair of boots with the square-toed London cut, and between layers of linen, 3 small notebooks bound in calf. Holmes opened one. The pages were dense with a clear, meticulous hand, dates, bearings, and references to wreck reports copied from old newspapers and Trinity House records. The same delicate sketch of a lantern occurred in the margin beside certain entries, always with a note. Sounding fathoms, light reported, contradicted by Admiralty survey. Ah, Holmes breathed. A man chasing contradictions. The best sport. He turned another page and tapped the margin. And here is our first quarry named. St. Margaret's Prize, 1798. Homeward from Cadiz, presumed sunk, private cargo. Note the underlining, Watson. Private cargo. Treasure is a coarse word, but men who do not say it plainly often act upon it all the same. We secured the notebooks and paid the proprietor to forget us, an act at which he was plainly accomplished. From thence we walked at a brisk pace to the offices of the naval hydrographer, where a mild-mannered clerk, after a short delay and a longer inspection of Holmes's letter, permitted us the use of certain charts and the wreck register. Holmes laid Pennington's fragment beside the Admiralty sheet. I watched him translate the man's dotted stitches into coordinates, as a musician might find a melody in scattered notes. Twice his finger paused, and twice he set a nail there. Twice he set a nail there. Here and here, he said at length. Discrepancies between reported wreck lights and sea-bottom soundings. In both cases, fishermen swore to a light at the water the night after a gale. The Admiralty dismissed it as St. Elmo's fire. Pennington did not. He marks a lantern. He finds one. At the 3rd dot, where your Prospero dredged, there was 60 years ago a scandal over false lights hung by wreckers upon the cliffs to mislead ships. Trinity House hanged 2 men at Freshwater for it. You believe Pennington sought not merely a wreck, said I, but a design, some apparatus, by which false lights were shown. I believe he sought a fact ugly enough to have made enemies a century ago, and profitable enough to have them still, Holmes replied. He folded the chart with a surgeon's care. The green flame that would not drown, the phosphor in the locker, the beeswaxed wick, these are tools to impress the fearful. They also bespeak a mind more modern than superstition. Someone aboard Vane's ship knew how to play upon both. And Pennington? I asked. Holmes's eyes, which a moment before had been cool instruments, took on a darker light. He left without a coat into a night 2 hours deep, from a bolted room opened from within. Either he went at his own will to meet someone, or he was made to seem to have done so. We will ask his diver and his mate which of those is likelier. We stepped back into the watery noon. The harbour was a forest of masts and funnels, gulls circling and crying like thin laughter on the wind. Holmes drew the oilskin tighter about the lantern in my valise and glanced toward the Prospero lying patient in the roadstead. Come, Watson, said he. Before the day is out, we shall look into the eyes of a man who has touched this brass with ink-stained fingers, and another who thinks that a sea's depth will always silence a story. I am curious which will blink first. Holmes was uncommonly quiet as we made our way back along the quay toward the Prospero. He had the notebooks of Oswald Pennington tucked beneath his arm, their neat pages sealed with a string. His head was bent, and I could tell that some new association, some freshly lit spark, was running its course through his mind. I had seen that look before. When the outward world receded and he stood within his own mental workshop, every nerve taut and every calculation measured. I knew better than to intrude, though my curiosity pressed upon me like the salt wind in my face. Captain Vane was waiting near the gangway. His shoulders seemed more burdened than when we had left him, as though the ship itself had grown heavier with the hours. He greeted us with a curt nod and led us down once again to the narrow mess where his officers awaited. The first mate Hargreaves sat stiff-backed, a man in his middle years with the lined, leathery skin of long sea duty. His expression was that of one determined to endure questioning without giving more than the barest syllables. Opposite him lounged Teague, the diver, whose massive arms seemed carved from rope and whose eyes shifted with the sly watchfulness of a man too accustomed to suspicion. Holmes offered them no introduction, only his hawk's gaze. "Gentlemen, we shall be brief. Mr. Pennington's disappearance admits of few possibilities, and it is in your interest that we sift them with clarity." He drew out the notebook, flicking it open as if by accident to the page with the lantern's sketch. "First, Mr. Hargreaves, your duties included maintaining the cargo book?" "They do," the mate said, his voice as rigid as his spine. "You therefore had access to ink and to this cabin's log?" Hargreaves's eyes narrowed. "Any officer aboard does." Holmes turned a page, let it fall. "And you kept company with Mr. Pennington?" "Little. He was no seaman, only a paying passenger. I ran a ship, not a salon." Holmes shifted to Teague, whose thick fingers drummed the table. "You, sir, handled the dredge that brought the lantern to light?" "Aye," Teague grunted. "Dragged it up myself. A queer bit of brass, but a man doesn't live long if he fears every barnacle with a shine on it." "Indeed. And when it burned, did you see it?" Teague's grin was unpleasant. "I saw a trick. Some gentlemen have more money than sense. A candle flaring through colored glass, nothing more. Yet you have dived for salvage before?" Holmes asked lightly. The diver shrugged. "Enough times. Bring up rope, bring up rust, once or twice a chest. Nothing worth your newspapers." Holmes studied him for a moment longer, then closed the notebook with a snap. "Curious, Watson, how men see only what they expect. The sailor believes in tricks, the landsman in phantoms. Truth commonly lies between." He rose. "Captain Vane, I shall speak with you alone." The officers filed out, Hargreaves stiff as a yardarm, Teague with a half-smile that never touched his eyes. Vane remained, his hand tightening upon the back of a chair. "Mr. Holmes," he said quietly, "do you suspect one of them?" "I suspect both," Holmes replied. "One writes with ink upon old brass, the other handles wrecks with fingers too eager. Between them lies your vanished gentleman." He tapped the notebooks. "This Pennington had knowledge, and knowledge is bait. Someone tugged at his line. And the lantern?" I asked. Holmes glanced at the oilskin bundle resting in my valise. "That, Watson, is the snare with which our fish were to be caught. Whether Pennington meant to use it or fell victim to it, we must yet learn. But mark me, this green flame is no idle marvel. It has been prepared as carefully as any stage illusion to persuade the ignorant. I have seen such substances before, phosphorescent powders, salts that flare with color when damp. To make them burn upon water requires cunning. To make men vanish by them requires crime." Captain Vane's brow darkened. "And Pennington?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "If he is alive, we shall find him. If not, his enemies will tell us why." He straightened, all the indolence gone. "Tonight, Captain, we require a favor. Leave your lantern where it was found under lock, but tell your men that Mr. Holmes intends to watch it burn. Spread the word with care. By morning, I expect our culprit will have tried to see it flare again. The plan was laid, and when dusk fell upon the harbor, Holmes and I kept our watch aboard the Prospero." The ship creaked softly at her moorings, the water lapping against her timbers, with a sound like lips whispering secrets. In the captain's cabin, the lantern sat once more in its chest, the oilskin folded aside, its panes dull in the dim lamplight. Holmes sat opposite it with his long fingers steepled, his gaze intent as though the thing might stir at any instant. Hours passed. The crew's footsteps echoed faintly above, the occasional clink of a chain or creak of cordage punctuating the silence. I confess that my eyelids drooped more than once. Holmes never stirred. At last, near midnight, a faint scuff sounded at the door, followed by the softest rattle of the latch. Holmes's eyes flicked to me, one hand raised. We held our breath. The latch rattled again, then ceased. Silence stretched. Holmes rose noiselessly, cat-like, and in a movement so swift I scarcely followed, he drew the door open. The passage was empty, save for a retreating shadow at the far bend. Holmes was after it in an instant, his steps noiseless upon the boards. I followed as best I could, my heart pounding. The figure darted down toward the lower hold. We caught the glimmer of a lamp snatched from its sconce, then the clatter of boots on iron steps. Holmes quickened his pace. The hold yawned before us, filled with the smell of tar, hemp, and salt cargo. The lamplight wavered ahead, then vanished behind a stack of crates. A scrape, a grunt, and the sound of wood against wood reached us. Holmes surged forward. When I rounded the crate, he had his quarry pinned against it, one long arm twisted behind the man's back, the lamp clattering to the floor. It was Hargreaves, the first mate. His face was grey with fury, his lips tight as rope. Holmes's eyes shone like steel. So, Mr. Hargreaves, the brass and the ink were yours after all. But tell me, what business had you with the lantern tonight, if not to make it burn for your own profit? The mate spat to the side, his silence more eloquent than denial. Holmes held him there, triumphant, the glow of the fallen lamp throwing his shadow long and strange across the crates. Hargreaves strained against Holmes's grip like a mast buckling in a gale, his teeth bared in a snarl. Yet Holmes held him immovable, his long arm bent like iron across the mate's shoulder. I snatched up the fallen lamp before it could spill oil across the deck, setting it upright against a crate, and then turned back to see Holmes's gaze fixed upon the prisoner with the cold intensity I had come to recognize as more dangerous than any raised pistol. "You sought the lantern," Holmes said quietly. "Not to guard it, but to claim it. Tell me, was it to silence what it might reveal or to profit from what it promises?" Hargreaves's face was rigid, the muscles twitching in stubborn silence. At last he rasped, "I owe you no answer." Holmes gave a thin smile. "On the contrary, you owe an answer to your captain, to your crew, and perhaps to the law. Fortunately, you have already said enough without words." He released the man suddenly, though with such force that Hargreaves stumbled against the crates. His pride wounded as deeply as his body. Captain Vane had hurried down during the struggle, his boots clanging on the steps, and now stood pale with fury. "By heaven, Hargreaves, if you have played me false—" But Holmes lifted a hand. "Patience, Captain. The mate's silence is eloquent. Yet silence alone is not proof." His gaze darted to me. "Watson, the lamp, if you please." I passed it across. Holmes set it upon a crate and produced a tiny vial from his pocket. With deliberate care he drew the stopper, dipped a finger and touched the rim of the lantern's glass. At once there bloomed the faintest shimmer, a ghostly green radiance clinging to the pane. It was no stronger than the glow of a dying ember, but in the dim hold it gleamed unmistakably. Vane's breath caught. Hargreaves's eyes flickered. "A trick," the mate muttered. "Chemicals." "Nothing more." "Precisely," Holmes returned with crisp satisfaction. "A trick contrived to convince fearful men of a supernatural power, and to cloak the disappearance of one Mr. Pennington. For observe, the glow is weak, for the lantern has been starved of the substance that feeds it. Yet someone had replenished it before Captain Vane first saw it burn. Someone with access to simple compounds, copper salts, phosphorus, beeswax wick, and sufficient knowledge to arrange the illusion. A man who writes in the log with ink-stained fingers, who has handled the lantern in recent days. Tell me, Hargreaves, did you plan to present this relic to your crew again tonight, to secure their obedience through fear?" The mate's jaw worked. He gave no answer, but his silence was thunderous. Holmes's tone sharpened. "You are clever, but not alone. For all your skill with ink, you could not have contrived the phosphorescence without materials fetched from ashore. And though you might silence one gentleman passenger, you could not vanish him from a bolted cabin without help. No, this has the hand of another, and I think we know whose." Vane's face darkened. "Teague," Holmes inclined his head. "The diver, with his roving hands and his habit of rummaging in the sea's coffers. He would have handled the wreck, ferried objects unseen, perhaps even lowered a boat in silence at night. A man accustomed to deep water would think little of a midnight errand in the waves. At this suggestion, Hargreaves flinched, so slight an involuntary gesture that another man might have missed it. But Holmes's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, caught it at once. He closed the vial, pocketed it, and said simply, "Watson, keep him in view." "Captain, I recommend he be confined to his cabin under guard. The diver is the more immediate danger." Vane barked an order, and 2 sailors hauled the furious mate away, his curses echoing down the passage. Holmes remained by the lantern, thoughtful, his hand resting lightly upon its hood. "You believe Pennington is still alive?" I asked in a low voice. Holmes's gaze did not leave the lantern. "It is possible. The absence of his coat argues against a planned escape, and his notebooks reveal a mind determined, not despairing. But if he lives, he is being held, perhaps even upon this very shore." The idea sent a chill through me. "And Teague? Teague will not resist his own curiosity. Men of his kind, Watson, cannot keep from touching what is forbidden. Tonight he will attempt what Hargreaves failed. We must be ready." The hours that followed tested my patience as much as my nerves. Holmes ordered the lantern returned to its chest, and once again we kept vigil in Vane's cabin, the ship silent but for the lapping tide and the occasional groan of timbers. Midnight passed. Then, nearer 2 o'clock, came the sound, a stealthy scrape, a faint thud from below. Holmes's eyes lit with that cold fire of the chase. "This way," he whispered. We descended the narrow steps to the divers' quarters. A dim glow bled from beneath the door, and as Holmes flung it open, we saw Teague crouched over the lantern, its hood raised, his thick fingers smeared with some paste that hissed faintly as he worked it into the wick. The glass shimmered with that same uncanny green, stronger now, painting his brutish face in sickly light. Teague started up with a snarl, but Holmes was upon him, quicker than a striking cat. The diver lunged, knocking the chest aside, but I hurled myself in with a soldier's instinct, and together we bore him down. He fought like a beast, his strength terrible. Yet Holmes twisted his wrist with such precision that the man cried out and dropped the lantern. I snatched it before it could shatter, my heart racing. Holmes rose, his breath steady despite the struggle. "And so," he said grimly, "the second player enters the stage. Between them, Watson, they have woven a net of false lights and vanished passengers, but it is not yet complete. Somewhere within this plot lies Pennington, and the reason men would risk mutiny and murder for a relic of brass, Teague, pinned by Vane's sailors who had rushed in at the commotion, glared up with the feral hatred of a man caught in his own snare." Holmes turned to the captain with quiet command. "Secure him well. Tomorrow we shall press him for speech, and perhaps then the sea will yield the secret it still keeps." And with that, Holmes lifted the lantern, its green shimmer dying upon the wick, and I felt that the heart of the mystery, though seized in our hands, had grown only darker in the grasp. The dawn was a dull smear of grey upon the water when Holmes and I returned to the deck, the air sharp with the tang of coal smoke from vessels stirring in the harbour. Below, Teague had been lashed into his bunk, guarded by 2 sailors whose faces betrayed as much unease as vigilance. Hargreaves likewise was confined, yet their capture, far from closing the matter, seemed to Holmes but the opening of a darker chapter. He paced the deck with restless precision, his coat drawn close about him, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "2 men, Watson," he murmured, "each entangled in a scheme that required this lantern as its centerpiece. But the question remains, what prize did they expect from Pennington's disappearance? For murder without gain is madness, and these men, though reckless, are not mad." Captain Vane joined us, his expression grave. "Holmes, I have sailed with Hargreaves 5 years and never doubted him till now. As for Teague, he has always been too fond of ale and wagers, but I trusted his skill. Yet I cannot fathom why either would seek to spirit away Pennington." Holmes stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. "Because Pennington carried knowledge. The notebooks show he had traced wrecks, marked false lights, recorded contradictions in Admiralty surveys. He was near to discovering something that others had long concealed. I suspect, Captain, that your 2 officers thought to silence him and seize the benefit of that discovery for themselves. And what benefit would that be?" I asked. Holmes's gaze turned seaward. "Treasure, perhaps, in the crude sense, or documents too compromising to surface. But more likely a wreck of peculiar importance, one whose very location had been hidden for reasons of profit or shame." Before I could press him further, a sailor came hurrying across the deck, with a telegram clutched in hand. Vane took it, broke the seal and passed it to Holmes. I read over his shoulder, to Captain Vane, Prospero, Portsmouth Dock. Inquire after Oswald Pennington. Family demand news. Report states he carried packet of rare charts from Trinity House archives. Highly valuable. Guard his effects. London solicitors Wentworth and Lee. Holmes's lips thinned. So, the circle tightens. Pennington bore not only knowledge but documents of rare import. If those fell into other hands, their worth could outweigh coin. He looked up sharply. Captain, where are these effects now? In his trunk, what you found, Vane said. But no packet of charts. No packet of charts. For then they are missing, Holmes said, and likely the very cause of this mischief. He closed the telegram. Watson, you see the shape of it now. Pennington pursued a chain of wrecks, their positions falsified or obscured, and he possessed charts to prove it. Someone feared exposure, or desired sole claim to the prize, and contrived his removal. The lantern with its spectral glow served to frighten the crew and mask the villainy. Then Hargreaves and Teague, I began. Played their parts, Holmes interrupted, but I doubt they are the masters of the game. They are instruments, rough hands to do delicate work. Yet there is another mind here, subtler, one who put the compounds in their grasp and the plan in their heads. It is to that mind we must look if we are to find Pennington. The morning brought little respite. Holmes insisted upon returning to shore, and we made our way once again to the hotel where Pennington had lodged. There Holmes demanded to see the register, and with his accustomed quickness he found the name inscribed upon the date of embarkation. Yet below it, written in a different hand but the same day, was another. Mr. Francis Elwood, London. Holmes tapped the name. This gentleman embarked on no vessel, yet departed the same morning as Pennington. Let us see if the innkeeper recalls him. The proprietor, roused from his accounts, frowned. Elwood, sir? A tall fellow, clean-shaven, with eyes that looked right through you. Spoke with a quiet voice. He stayed but a night. Left early, I thought, for Southampton, though he carried no luggage. Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me. Describe him more fully. Scholar-like, the innkeeper said. Wore spectacles. Paid in gold, too. Odd for such a man. Outside, Holmes walked with quick strides, his cane tapping furiously. Elwood, Watson, there is our hidden hand. While Pennington bore the charts, Elwood shadowed him. He may have lured him from the cabin that night, promising knowledge or alliance, and then vanished with him. The mate and diver were but accomplices, set to contrive the lantern's play-acting. The true prize, the charts, are with Elwood, but where does that leave Pennington? I asked. Holmes halted, his eyes ablaze. Alive, I hope, though a prisoner, for Elwood would need him until the charts are properly deciphered. But the danger is grave. He turned abruptly. We must learn whence Elwood came. Back to London, Watson. There is no time to lose. By noon we were upon the train again, the Prospero left behind with her prisoners guarded. Holmes sat in deep abstraction, scarcely speaking, though once he muttered, Elwood, the lantern, the false lights, a chain of wrecks stitched across the channel, and one man bold enough to seek their truth. It is a perilous game, Watson. But before it ends, we shall see whether it is the sea that swallows men, or men who swallow the sea's secrets. I watched him as the countryside blurred past the window, his thin profile etched against the light. The case had grown larger than I had imagined, spreading tendrils from the hold of a single ship into the very heart of maritime power. And as the train thundered northward, I could not shake the sense that Pennington's fate, and perhaps ours, hung upon the dim green glow of that accursed lantern. The train carried us into London beneath a sky low and sullen with cloud, the lamps already glimmering, though the day was not yet spent. Holmes descended from the carriage with that peculiar quickness, which meant his mind had leapt far ahead of the hour. He hailed a cab before I had fully gathered my coat, and as we rattled through the crowded streets, he spoke with the clipped certainty of one arranging chess pieces toward a decisive end. Elwood's name is too carefully placed to be an accident, Watson. A scholar-like man who pays in gold, shadows a passenger, and vanishes the same morning Pennington does. This is the spider at the center of the web. We must know his connections. Gold implies means. The spectacles, a man accustomed to study. The secrecy, a cause too delicate for daylight. And where do we begin? I asked. With the Admiralty records, Holmes said. Pennington copied wreck surveys and marked them against false reports. If Elwood sought him out, it was because those documents intersected with knowledge only another student of the sea would possess. There are few haunts in London where such men gather. Trinity House is one. The Naval Hydrographic Office is another. But I suspect, and here he tapped the side of the cab, the British Museum's maritime manuscripts will yield our Elwood if anywhere. A scholar does not conceal his trail so well that a careful nose cannot follow it. We reached Bloomsbury as dusk settled, and Holmes's card secured us entry into the quiet hall where maps and charts, brittle with age, lay in glass cases under the watchful eye of clerks. He moved among them with the silence of a shadow, pausing here and there to examine the sign-in registers. At length he beckoned me with a suppressed exclamation. His finger rested upon a line entered 3 weeks past. Francis Elwood, London, consulting 17th century wreck charts, Channel Coast. There, Watson, Holmes whispered. Our man was burrowing here while Pennington pursued his survey at sea. 2 strands converging upon the same knot. But observe further, he returned not once but thrice, each time seeking references to false lights and wrecking along the Isle of Wight. He straightened, eyes gleaming. This Elwood is no mere amateur. He has studied the very fabric of deception by which ships were ruined. Pennington's notes were the key, and Elwood determined to obtain them at any cost. At Holmes's request, the clerk brought forth a volume Elwood had consulted. Within it were reports of wreckers tried and hanged in the late 18th century, their devices described in grim detail. Lanterns with coloured panes, phosphorescent oils, contraptions rigged upon cliffs to mimic a ship's riding light. Holmes read swiftly, his lips moving. Yes, and here a note of a missing consignment, bound from Cadiz, rumoured to contain bullion. The St. Margaret's prize, Watson. This is the very wreck Pennington marked. No wonder men plot. We left the museum with a chill certainty pressing upon us. Holmes's eyes were alight with that fierce inward fire, but his tone was controlled when he said, Now to track the man himself. His gold suggests patrons, Watson. No scholar funds such an enterprise alone. We shall call upon Wentworth and Lee, those solicitous lawyers, and see what ties may bind them. It was late, yet Holmes's name opened their doors. We were shown into an office where the younger partner, Lee, pale and precise, received us with the air of one already braced for unwelcome questions. Holmes wasted no time. Mr. Lee, your telegram to Captain Vane spoke of Pennington's family demanding news and of charts entrusted to him. Pray, who authorized that message? Lee hesitated, then admitted, It was at the behest of a client, sir, who preferred discretion, a gentleman with commercial interests in salvage. He has retained us to safeguard any papers Pennington carried. Would that gentleman's name be Francis Elwood? Holmes asked, his tone deceptively mild. The lawyer's composure faltered. Elwood is associated, yes, though not as principal. He acts for a consortium, merchants who have long sought claim to the wreck of the St. Margaret's prize. They believe Admiralty records were falsified, and that Pennington had evidence to prove the true position. But if you imagine they condone violence, Holmes cut him off. Spare me the protestations. Your Elwood shadowed Pennington, secured the charts, and vanished with the man himself. If your consortium values its reputation, you will furnish me with Elwood's direction at once. The lawyer wrung his hands but yielded. A lodging near Limehouse. He is seldom in town, preferring to keep close to the river and the shipping offices. Number 14, Narrow Street. Within the hour we were there, our cab jolting over cobbles slick with drizzle. The Thames lay dark and heaving, the air rank with coal smoke and fish. Narrow Street deserved its name. A twisting row of houses pressed close to the river wall, their windows yellow squares in the murk. Holmes moved like a hound upon scent, his gaze sweeping doorways until it fixed upon a house with shutters drawn, and only the faintest glow leaking at the edges. Watson, he murmured. Our quarry is within. He rapped sharply. No answer. Again, harder. Still silence. With a swift glance around, he drew a thin instrument from his coat and in moments had the lock yielding. We entered a narrow passage smelling of damp and oil. From beyond a closed door came the faint scrape of a chair. Holmes pressed a finger to his lips, then flung the door wide. The room within was lit by a single lamp. At the table sat a man of scholarly aspect, his spectacles gleaming, his hair brushed with care. Before him lay a spread of charts, the very ones from Pennington's trunk. He looked up with a start, his expression icy, and I knew at once this was Elwood. Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting the silence. "Mr. Francis Elwood, I believe. The lantern may have played upon sailors' fears, but it will not dazzle me. Where is Oswald Pennington?" Elwood's lips curved in a thin smile. "Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "you are expected." The words chilled me more than any lantern's glow. For if we were expected, then the game was already far deeper than we had guessed. Elwood did not rise from his chair, but the lamp threw sharp planes of shadow across his face, making his spectacles gleam like twin coins. Holmes advanced a step and I followed, every nerve alert. For there was in the air that peculiar tension I had felt once or twice before in criminal lairs, an expectation of violence cloaked in civility. "You know me." "Then," Holmes said, his voice clipped. Elwood folded his hands upon the spread of charts. "Who in my position would not? A man dabbling in waters so deep must account for the hound the world unleashes when secrets are stirred." "I did not expect you so swiftly, but I confess the challenge pleases me." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Your words betray what you call yourself, a scholar. Yet your deeds are those of a wrecker. You have charts that are not yours, and a man's life hangs upon your silence." "I shall not play at riddles, sir." "Where is Oswald Pennington?" For a moment Elwood's expression did not shift. Then he gave a soft laugh, almost regretful. "Alive, I assure you, though not free. He is spirited away where neither you nor the Admiralty's clerks will stumble upon him." "He is useful." I took an involuntary step forward, but Holmes's arm restrained me. His gaze never left Elwood's face. "Useful to whom? To you? Or to the consortium of merchants whose gold has oiled this enterprise?" The scholar inclined his head. "Call it a consortium if you wish. Call it men who seek redress against a century of lies. The Admiralty falsified those wreck records to protect interests too delicate to name. Ships deliberately misdirected, their cargo swallowed in silence, and the wreckers punished while the true profiteers slept soundly. Pennington uncovered too much. He needed guidance and protection. I offered both. Protection by vanishing him from a locked cabin, Holmes retorted. Protection by compounding phosphor to play tricks upon a crew's imagination. Protection by employing Hargreaves and Teague to do your rough work. You mistake coercion for guardianship, sir. The man's jaw tightened, but his tone remained smooth. You cannot imagine the weight of what lies in those wrecks? Bullion, yes, but also records, papers of treaties, cargoes not meant for daylight. If brought forth, they would shake confidence in our naval history itself. Pennington is too passionate a man. He needed a firmer hand. Holmes's nostrils flared. A hand that tightens into a noose, no doubt. You will produce him. Tonight. Elwood's gaze flicked to the door almost imperceptibly. Holmes caught it. In an instant he was at the man's side, one hand upon his shoulder, the other sweeping the charts into his own keeping. Elwood made no resistance, only sighed as though a professor whose lecture had been interrupted. You will find him upon the river, Elwood said quietly, in a warehouse near Limehouse Cut. My men keep him there under the pretense of guarding salvage stores. You see, Holmes, I am not your true adversary. I am merely the mind. The hands are rougher, less willing to parley. Holmes's eyes bored into him. Then the mind shall accompany us. Watson, bring that lamp. If Elwood thinks to play his final card, I prefer to hold him at the table. We left the house swiftly, Holmes keeping our prisoner close, though Elwood carried himself as if an invited guest. The cab clattered through the wet streets, the air raw with the scent of the river. At last we drew up before a long warehouse squatting against the water, its shuttered windows dark, its walls streaked with damp. Holmes paid the driver and motioned me to silence. Watson, keep your revolver ready, he whispered. I smell more than mildew here. Inside the place was cavernous, the air heavy with tarpaulin and mold. Lanterns hung at intervals, casting long bars of light. And there at the far end upon a low cot lay a figure, thin, motionless, his wrists bound. I hurried forward and bent to him. It was Pennington. His eyes fluttered open at my touch, bewildered but alive. Holmes cut the cords with his pocket-knife. Courage, sir. You are safe now. But before Pennington could answer, a sound cracked through the gloom, the scrape of boots, the rasp of a bolt. From the shadows surged two figures, their faces half hidden by scarves. One held a cudgel, the other a knife. Holmes thrust Elwood toward me. Guard him, Watson, he commanded, and flung himself at the assailants with the sudden ferocity of a greyhound loosed. The cudgel whistled through the air, grazing his shoulder, but he ducked beneath it and seized the man's wrist. twisting until the weapon clattered away. I drew my revolver and leveled it at the knife-bearer. "Drop it," I barked. The fellow hesitated, then, seeing the iron in my hand, and Holmes's wiry strength pinning his companion, he let the blade fall with a curse. In the silence that followed, only Pennington's laboured breathing broke the stillness. Holmes straightened, his quarry subdued, and fixed Elwood with a gaze colder than the river mist. "Your hands, your hirelings, your lantern tricks, all collapse at the first firm touch. But truth, Mr. Elwood, does not collapse, it rises. And tomorrow it shall rise before the law." Elwood's expression was unreadable, though I thought I glimpsed a flicker of admiration behind the spectacles. "You are relentless, Mr. Holmes, but even you cannot suppress what lies beneath the sea." The lantern was but a symbol. "The truth will shine whether you quench it or not." Holmes gave a short, sharp laugh devoid of mirth. "Then we shall let it shine in daylight, sir. Not in phosphorescent deceit." With Pennington supported between us, we led the prisoners into the pale morning light, breaking over the Thames, where the fog thinned and the first gulls cried. The case was far from over. Holmes's mind was already weaving the threads together, but the man who had vanished at sea now stood once more upon firm ground, and I felt that the heart of the mystery, though dark yet, had at last begun to yield to Holmes's inexorable reason. Pennington sagged between us as we brought him into the street, his legs trembling with the effort of standing after so many hours bound. Holmes hailed a constable with a whistle shrill enough to pierce the fog, and within minutes the clatter of boots announced reinforcements. The two ruffians were secured, their cudgel and knife bundled into a sergeant's hands. Elwood submitted with the air of a man who knew his game had been interrupted, but not in his mind ended. His gaze never left Holmes, and though the lamplight revealed nothing but calm in his expression, I could not help but feel the chill of unspoken threats in it. We conveyed Pennington to Baker Street before dawn, for Holmes insisted he would not risk the man falling once more into other hands while matters remained unresolved. Mrs. Hudson was aghast at his pallor and hastened to fetch broth, but Holmes forbade any delay in hearing the truth. "Mr. Pennington," he said, "once the poor fellow was eased into the armchair by the fire, we have gone far enough with half-truths and silences. If you value your safety and ours, you will tell us everything, what you sought, what you carried, and why Elwood and his consortium risked so much to silence you." Pennington's eyes, sunken with exhaustion, darted from Holmes to me. At last he gave a weary nod. "Very well." I pursued what many have suspected but few dared prove, that the Admiralty, a century ago, permitted or even contrived false wreck records to conceal the loss of ships too heavily laden with treasure or contraband. The St. Margaret's prize was foremost among them. She was rumoured to carry bullion from Cadiz, diverted by false lights upon the Needles. The official survey dismissed the wreckers' reports, but fragments survived. Entries in parish logs, fishermen's tales, and an obscure note in Trinity House records. I gathered them, charted them, and at last traced a line of deception across the channel. The lantern we recovered was no accident, but one of the very devices used to lure ships astray. Holmes inclined his head, as if the confirmation merely aligned with what his mind had already constructed. "And the packet of charts entrusted to you." Pennington's voice dropped. "They were not mine, but lent by a clerk within Trinity House who believed in my cause. They contained soundings suppressed from the official record, proof of shoals where no shoals were supposed to be, and of wrecks deliberately erased. I meant to expose it. Elwood came to me first as an ally. He spoke of reform, of justice for seamen lost to lies. But it became clear he had other patrons, men who desired the prize, not the truth. The night he spirited me from my cabin, he gave me choice, serve him or disappear forever beneath the sea. Beneath the sea." I could not restrain an exclamation of horror. "And you yielded?" "I feigned consent," Pennington said bitterly, "but I knew my fate was sealed the moment I placed my trust in him. He cared nothing for justice. He meant to claim the wrecks for his consortium, and perhaps to blackmail the Admiralty with what the charts revealed." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then the core of it is not merely treasure, but leverage. A century of naval shame, brought to light in the wrong hands, could shake governments as surely as cannon." He rose, paced once across the room, and then turned to me. "Watson, Elwood must not be treated as a common thief. Scotland Yard will receive him, but the Admiralty must be warned. There are men in Whitehall who will know what shadows lie upon their ledgers. This business cannot be left to fester in back rooms. Pennington leaned forward, clutching the arms of the chair. Holmes, you must promise, whatever comes, these charts must not vanish again into secrecy. Too many lives were lost to the greed of a few. Holmes regarded him coolly. I promise nothing beyond the pursuit of truth. Whether the world chooses to acknowledge it is not within my power. He turned abruptly to me. Watson, we go to Whitehall. By noon that day we stood in the dim offices of the Admiralty, the fog outside pressing against the tall windows like a grey tide. Sir Alistair Martin, a heavy-jawed official of forbidding mien, listened as Holmes laid out the tale of the lantern dredged from the deep, of Pennington's disappearance, of Elwood's scheme and the missing charts. Martin's face grew grimmer with each detail. At last he said, Mr. Holmes, you speak of matters that, if true, touch upon the very honour of His Majesty's Navy. You have Pennington, you have Elwood, you have these notebooks. But the charts, where are they? Holmes drew them from his coat and laid them upon the table. Recovered from Elwood's lodging. See for yourself. Martin bent over them, his thick fingers trembling despite his effort to appear composed. He scanned the inked soundings, the marginalia, the crude sketches of lanterns. When he looked up, his eyes were hooded. This cannot reach the public. Do you understand me? The consequences? Holmes interrupted with unusual sharpness. I understand perfectly, Sir Alistair. You would smother the truth to preserve appearances. But I tell you plainly, the truth will smoulder through any covering, as it always does. Elwood's men already know enough to spread tales. Your only choice is whether to own the truth or be undone by it. For a long moment the two men locked gazes, the silence taut as wire. At last Martin sank back defeated. You will leave Elwood to us. His consortium will be broken. And Pennington. We shall find a use for his knowledge, if he consents to serve the Crown. When we emerged into the foggy street once more, Holmes's face was unreadable. I ventured, have we won, Holmes? He gave a short, mirthless laugh. We have prevented one crime, Watson, but whether we have prevented truth from sinking once more into the depths, that remains to be seen. For the sea keeps its secrets, but so too does Whitehall. That evening, back at Baker Street, Holmes sat long with his pipe unlit, his gaze fixed upon the lantern which rested on the table between us. Its greenish panes caught the firelight and glimmered faintly, as though some ghost of the sea still breathed within. At last he spoke almost to himself. False lights upon the cliffs, false lights upon the page. Men deceive more surely than waves. But the pattern remains. Pennington sought to stitch it together, Elwood to cut the thread. And he paused, his eyes narrowing. I have only traced the lantern's glow to the edge of the sea. What lies beneath, Watson, will haunt Admiralty ledgers long after we are gone. I said nothing, for I knew his mind was still racing far beyond my reach. And the lantern, silent upon the table, seemed almost to pulse with secrets untold. The hours that followed our return from Whitehall were curiously heavy, as if the very air in Baker Street had absorbed the weight of secrets too old and too grave to be lifted. Pennington lay dozing in the spare room, worn by his ordeal, while Holmes sat rigid in his armchair, fingers steepled, eyes half closed, though I knew well that his mind was far from rest. The lantern glimmered faintly on the table beside him, a sullen sentinel between us. I found myself pacing more than once, my thoughts circling around Martin's veiled words and the memory of Elwood's calm defiance. At last Holmes spoke, his tone abrupt. You marked, Watson, how Martin accepted the charts, yet with what reluctance he yielded even the shadow of acknowledgement. The Admiralty will silence Elwood and scatter his associates, but they will not willingly permit the truth to breathe. That tells us the matter runs deeper still. You suspect Martin himself complicit? I asked. Holmes's eyes opened. Not complicit, perhaps, but guardian of a legacy too dangerous to unveil. A man of his stripe measures loyalty to an institution above loyalty to fact. Yet I am haunted by Elwood's words, that the lantern was but a symbol, and the true fire lies beneath the sea. He was no ordinary charlatan, Watson. He was a man convinced of his righteousness, which makes him doubly perilous. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his lean frame and sharp features a familiar sight. He carried a sheaf of papers and a face clouded with unease. Evening, Mr. Holmes, I thought you'd want word. We've Elwood under guard at Scotland Yard, but the man's no common prisoner. Solicitors banging on the doors, whispering of influence higher than my reach. And then this. He thrust the papers into Holmes's hands. Holmes scanned them swiftly. They were reports of disturbances along the south coast. Fishermen claiming to have seen strange lights at sea, near the Needles and further westward. Lanterns glowing green against the fog, moving where no vessel should be. Lestrade shifted uneasily. Superstition spreads faster than cholera, Mr. Holmes. Crews swear the sea is haunted. I'll not keep men steady if this continues. Holmes's lips thinned. So the game is not ended. Elwood's hand may be chained, but his confederates still play their trick. They would convince the coast that Pennington's revelations are no mere scholarship, but a living curse. That fear, Watson, will guard their secrets better than iron. He rose suddenly. Fair Inspector, you will hold Elwood firm no matter what pressure comes. Watson and I must go south again. The lantern's glow has not yet been quenched. Before dawn we were once more upon the Portsmouth train, Pennington left in Lestrade's cautious care. The November mists hung thick over the Solent when we reached the harbour. Captain Vane met us grim-faced. He had kept his ship at anchor under Admiralty orders, the crew restless and mutinous with rumour. They say Pennington walks the waves, he muttered bitterly. Last night, 2 men swore they saw his shape lit in green fire by the Needles. I've near lost all discipline. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Then we must cut through this miasma at once. Captain, have your boat readied. We go to the Needles tonight. The hours crept by with maddening slowness. Holmes spent them poring over Pennington's notebooks once more, tracing the dotted stitches across the channel. He marked one entry again and again. Sounding contradicts survey. Lantern reported by fishermen 1798. At last, as dusk bled into night, he looked up, his eyes alight with that terrible clarity that always presaged the moment of truth. Watson, the pattern is complete. Pennington followed the wrecks westward, each a link in a chain of deception. The final link lies beneath the cliffs of the Needles. There Elwood's men still signal, not to lure ships to ruin, but to guard the place from prying eyes. Whatever lies beneath must be recovered before they can spirit it away. We put off in Vane's launch, 6 sailors pulling steady strokes. The wind cut raw across the water, and the cliffs loomed white as bone against the darkening sky. Holmes stood at the prow, his coat whipping about him, the lantern clutched in his hands like a challenge. Then, as the tide turned, I saw it, far off against the surf, a flicker of unnatural green. It flared, wavered, then steadied, a ghostly beacon upon the water. The sailors muttered prayers, their oars faltering, but Holmes's voice cut sharp across the night. Steady. That is no spirit's fire, but man's contrivance. Pull if you value truth over fear. We drew nearer, and the light resolved itself, another lantern, twin to the one we carried, hoisted upon a crude spar lashed to the rocks. Figures moved in its glow, hauling at ropes. A boat lay tethered, and in it a dark shape half-shrouded, a chest or coffer freshly dragged from the sea. By heaven, I whispered. They have already begun. Holmes's hand clamped my arm. There, Watson, lies the heart of it. The wreck of the St. Margaret's prize, or what remains of her, yields her secret tonight, and it is our task to seize it before Elwood's shadows claim it for themselves. He raised the lantern high, and its panes caught the sea wind glimmering faintly, as if one false light challenged another across the black water. The sailors bent to their oars once more, and we sped toward the cliffs, into the green glow that promised both revelation and peril. The boat surged forward under the straining oars, the black water hissing against her prow. The cliffs of the Needles loomed higher with every stroke, their pale faces gleaming in the spectral light. That strange green fire still burned upon the crude spar, swaying in the wind like a phantom's eye. Around it moved the silhouettes of men, their gestures hurried, furtive, and I could hear above the wash of the tide the groan of rope and the thud of timber, as some heavy burden was wrestled into place. Holmes stood at the prow, the lantern in his grasp, casting back its own dim glimmer, so that it seemed one false beacon challenged another across the dark. He turned his head just enough to address Captain Vane, who steered with grim determination. "Run her close to the rocks, Captain. Your men must hold steady when fear urges them otherwise. For what waits upon that shore is no ghost, but flesh and bone." The sailors muttered but obeyed, their oars biting deep. As we neared the rocks, One of the figures above cried out and a second lantern flared. This time crimson, a warning signal. Instantly the men upon the ledge began to haul their burden with frantic speed, striving to heave it into the waiting boat below. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Watson, you see? They have raised some chest from the wreck and would spirit it away before dawn. That coffer is the true heart of this conspiracy." The launch ground against stone, and before I could fully rise, Holmes had leapt ashore with the agility of a cat. I followed, revolver drawn, and Captain Vane, cursing, brought 2 sailors scrambling up behind us. The men on the rocks gave a cry of alarm, abandoning their ropes, and one darted forward with a club raised. Holmes met him unflinching, a sudden thrust of his cane sending the weapon clattering away. Another swung a knife toward me, but the revolver's cold muzzle at his chest checked him before the blade could fall. The chest lay half-dragged upon the rocks, its iron bands dripping with brine, seaweed clinging to its seams. Holmes bent over it, his eyes fierce with that strange rapture that seized him when the threads of a mystery drew taut. "This, Watson, is what Elwood would claim, what the Admiralty would bury, and what Pennington nearly lost his life to reveal. The wreck of the St. Margaret's prize has yielded her ghost." Before we could press further, the crimson lantern above toppled, striking the rocks in a shower of sparks. For an instant I thought it some accident, until a voice rang out from the darkness. "Hold them! Hold until the tide takes the rest!" A figure darted into view, cloaked against the spray, his bearing unmistakably that of command. Holmes's face hardened. "Elwood," he said softly, though the man had been under lock in London hours before. Yet as the figure drew nearer, the likeness was uncanny. The same scholar's profile, the same gleam of spectacles. The apparition vanished again into shadow, leaving only the echo of his words. Vane swore under his breath. "More of his men. We'll be swarmed before long." Holmes straightened. "Then we must secure the coffer at once. Captain, have your men heave it into the launch. Watson, stand guard." The sailors strained, their muscles taut as rope, until with a final heave the chest thudded into the boat. But scarcely had they loosed their grip when shouts rose from either side and figures clambered down the cliffs, 6 at least, armed with sticks and knives. The clash was swift and brutal. Vane laid one man low with a blow of his oar. I fired into the air, the report cracking across the water, which checked another assailant. Holmes fought with cool precision, his cane striking nerve and wrist with the accuracy of a surgeon's scalpel. Yet the press of numbers grew. One sailor fell with a cry, a knife slashing his arm, and the launch rocked as men struggled aboard. Then Holmes did a thing so daring it froze even our attackers. He seized the lantern we had carried, the very relic from the wreck, and raised it high above his head. With his free hand he struck the wick and whispered the words Vane had repeated to us. "Let what shone beneath the sea shine now." For an instant, nothing happened. Then the wick flared, and from the green panes burst a light so ghastly that the rocks themselves seemed drowned in underwater glow. The men who had advanced faltered, terror in their faces. One cried aloud, dropped his blade, and scrambled back up the cliff. Another slipped upon the wet stone in his haste to flee. Within moments the assault had broken, leaving only the groans of the wounded and the hiss of waves. Holmes lowered the lantern, his face calm though his eyes burned. Superstition is the weapon they chose. Let them feel its edge turned against them. He thrust the lantern into my hands. "Guard it well. It has served its purpose." We hurried the coffer into the launch and pushed off from the rocks. The tide caught us, and with steady strokes we pulled into open water, the cliffs receding into shadow. Behind us the false lantern still flickered faintly, a ghost light upon the cliff, but the chest at our feet was weightier than any phantom. Back aboard the Prospero, the sailors crowded close, their fear turned to awe as Holmes ordered the chest hoisted to the deck. Its lock was rusted but yielded to iron tools. When the lid groaned open, the stench of sea and age poured forth, but within gleamed not treasure alone but bundles of oilskin-wrapped documents, their seals cracked yet legible. Holmes lifted one carefully, scanning the faded ink. "Naval dispatches," he said. "Records of cargo manifests, orders of convoy, even notes of treaties. Contraband hidden from history. This, Watson, is the cargo that condemned the St. Margaret's prize." Vane stared in disbelief. "Not gold?" "Gold enough, perhaps," Holmes replied, indicating the dull gleam of coins beneath the papers. "But the true value lies here. Proof enough to shame a ministry, to ruin reputations a century old." This is why Elwood and his masters schemed. This is why Pennington vanished. The coffer was sealed once more, and Holmes turned to Vane. "Captain, you will deliver this into Admiralty hands. But not quietly. Make it known you recovered it by your own crew's labor, witnessed by myself and Dr. Watson. Let it be daylight, not darkness that shines upon it." As dawn broke over the Solent, pale and cold, I looked upon Holmes standing by the coffer, his features drawn but triumphant. He had wrested truth from the sea itself, yet I saw in his eyes no exultation, only that fierce restlessness which never left him long. For he knew, as I did, that men would seek still to bury what the waves had given up, and that the lantern's green light would haunt more than sailors' tales. It would haunt the ledgers of power and the conscience of a nation. The coffer and its contents were borne to Whitehall under heavy guard, Captain Vane marching beside it with a pride that steadied the nerves of his crew. Pennington, pale but resolute, gave his testimony in full, and Elwood, when confronted with the recovered documents, abandoned his mask of scholarship at last. His defense was not of innocence but of necessity, that history itself required a reckoning, even if truth must be extorted by deceit. The Admiralty, pressed between fear of scandal and the undeniable evidence before them, chose a compromise. Elwood and his accomplices would face trial for conspiracy, while the cargo and its damning records were consigned to the Crown's vaults, with the promise, hollow I thought, that justice would someday be made public. For Holmes, however, the matter did not end with the tribunal. Days later, in the quiet of Baker Street, he laid aside the newspapers with their columns of half-truths and looked at me across the hearth. "You perceive, Watson, how men may use false lights not only upon cliffs but upon the page. What the Admiralty buries in ink may prove more dangerous than what wreckers ever hung upon a spar." He tapped the bowl of his pipe, his tone more contemplative than triumphant. "Pennington's life was preserved, but his cause is thwarted. He wished truth laid bare to the world, yet truth in the hands of powerful men is often treated as contraband. I could not but protest. Yet you unmasked Elwood, rescued Pennington, and prevented the coffer from vanishing into obscurity. Surely that is victory enough." Holmes's smile was thin. "Victory of a sort. But mark me, Watson, the sea has an infinite patience. What it hides it will yield again to those who search with courage. The same may be said of history. Today the truth is locked away, but tomorrow, perhaps through another Pennington, it will rise. Pennington himself came to us once more before departing for his family." He pressed Holmes's hand with quiet gratitude. "You saved my life and more. You saved my faith that one man's pursuit of truth is not folly." His eyes turned to the lantern resting upon the sideboard. "I should have feared that thing, yet now I see it differently. Here it shone beneath the sea, and in your hands, Mr. Holmes, it shone against those who would deceive." When he had gone, Holmes regarded the lantern for a long while. Its glass still bore the faint green stain of phosphor, though the wick was dark. Strange, is it not, Watson? An object fashioned for deception became the very instrument by which deception was undone. Perhaps that is justice of a kind. That evening we walked together through the fog-bound streets, the gas lamps blurred halos in the mist. Holmes spoke little, his thoughts clearly turned inward. At last, as we crossed the embankment and the river's black tide slid beneath us, he said, "You recall, Watson, how Elwood told us the truth would shine whether quenched or not. He was right, though not in the sense he intended. It is not the green glow of false fire that endures, but the steady light of reason. That and that alone guides us through fog." I answered nothing, for I knew such words were less meant for me than spoken aloud for his own austere satisfaction. But as I looked back toward the dim outline of the Houses of Parliament, I could not help but feel that somewhere in those vaults, amid damp stone and iron locks, the coffer of the St. Margaret's prize still pulsed with a hidden light, waiting for the day it might once more rise to the surface. And so concluded the affair of the lantern that shone beneath the sea. It left no medals, no public triumphs, only the quiet knowledge that in the balance between deception and truth, Holmes had once again set the scale a little straighter. Yet even he admitted that this was but a single battle in a greater war, one waged not upon battlefields, but in ledgers, charts, and the memories of men. And as long as false lights glimmered in the world, I knew Sherlock Holmes would be there to meet them with the brilliance of his own.